Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's presentation on helping to identify signs of anxiety in children and how to support children's mental health during the pandemic. My name is Gino Priolo, and I am the Assistant Superintendent of Schools here in Haddonfield. And I'm really excited about this evening. It really is our goal that you come away with some helpful information to help guide you in supporting your children through any kinds of mental health issues with which they may be experiencing. Please know at all times, school staff and personnel are prepared to help support your children and their social emotional wellness in any reasonable way. At the end of tonight's presentation, I'll talk to you about a new program that we established in the district just this school year as an additional layer of support during this time. But let's go ahead and kick this off, and I'll tell you a little bit about our guest, Dr. Kendall. And Dr. Kendall, if you wouldn't mind just advancing to that next slide. So Dr. Kendall is a distinguished university professor and Laura H. Carnell Professor of Psychology. His CV lists over 800 publications, including over 40 books and treatment manuals. His treatment for anxiety in youth has been translated in over a dozen languages. He is twice a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford, won the Research Recognition Award from the Anxiety Disorders Association of America, was awarded the Aaron T. Beck Award for significant and enduring contributions, and was honored in 2019 with the ABCT Lifetime Achievement Award. His treatment for anxiety has been evaluated in numerous randomized clinical trials conducted in different countries, examined by literature reviewers, and subsequently given the designation of an empirically supported treatment. Dr. Kendall and I have had the opportunity to work together over the past several months. Dr. Kendall presented several hours of training for our school counselors and child study team members, and is slated to do additional work with our mental health staff in the coming weeks. So a little bit about throughout the presentation, at any time you can submit a question. If Dr. Kendall, you wouldn't mind just advancing to that next slide, where I'll talk about how to submit a question. So what you're going to do is click the activities button in the top right, and it's indicated with that little symbol I have there. You're going to click the Q&A button. In the bottom right corner, click Ask a Question, and then type the question in the box and hit Post. I will be your moderator throughout the night. We'll try to stop periodically to answer questions. And again, I hope you find this evening's presentation informative. One last thing, please make sure your microphone is on mute throughout tonight's presentation. Dr. Kendall, the floor is yours. And the most popular saying of 2020, 2021, Dr. Kendall, you are muted.
There we go.
All right.
I think people might want to know what time we're shooting to end.
Yes, we are shooting to end no later than 8:30, likely closer to 8:15.
Okay, cool. Just so folks know. So thank you for that nice introduction. I appreciate it. It's fun to hear all those things, but it also makes me feel old. So it comes at a cost. A quick conflict of interest. I receive royalties from the sales of materials related to the treatment of anxiety in youth, and so it's important that I share that. It's not that great of an amount, so it's not that great of a conflict of interest, but it is there, and it should be shared. So let me share that. Okay, I'm clicking on my advance button, and it's not quick. It's not moving as quickly as I would like. So bear with me. It's just a little slow. I put this slide in there just because there's a group in New York that I worked with a while back, and they put together some things for kids ages 5 to 10, and it's free. So if you're interested, it's just ohelfamily.org/workbook. And they put together materials that have to do with young kids and the COVID crisis.
Dr. Kendall, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was remiss in neglecting to mention one thing at the start. This whole evening was made possible by a HEA grant that one of our high school teachers, Stacy Brown Downham, successfully wrote. So I want to thank you. It's been a special thank you to Stacy and all of our HEA members for making this evening's presentation possible. Thank you.
You got to thank the people who did the work, right? Got to do it. Got to do it. Okay, so it's taking me 3 or 4 clicks before this will advance, and I'm not sure why, but here we go. So my work is on anxiety. I've been doing it for about 35 years. But when I was asked by Dr. Prulio to do a presentation, he said he wanted it to be focused on the COVID crisis. So being a typical academic, what do you think I did? I did my homework. I went and I got all these printouts of people who've tried to do studies on issues related to anxiety and emotional distress during COVID. And what I discovered is we don't know a lot. We're just learning. However, a lot of what I read, even though some of it wasn't good hard science yet, is very consistent with what we already know. So I think what I'll be able to do is present some information that is supported by the data, useful and clinically applicable. But some of it is a little bit of a leap into the COVID world because we don't have some hard data yet on that, but we'll get to it. All right, so let me start by talking about anxiety. And this comes out of my experience when I present to people in schools when they don't know the topic is anxiety. They just think it's general. And they say things like, well, anxiety is not a problem. I mean, we have kids who bring weapons to school, or we have drugs, or we have teen pregnancy, or we have abuse. All those things are important. I don't mean to diminish them. But anxiety is a quiet distress, and it's a quiet distress that we all have because anxiety is normal. But for youngsters, when it's maladaptive and interfering, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, it doesn't go away with time. It actually predicts adult anxiety disorders. It predicts to adult depression. And surprisingly, but quite statistically significant, if you're socially anxious at age 15, a lot of people are, it's normal, but if you're maladaptive and interfering level of social anxiety at age 15, you're 6.4 times more likely to have a substance use problem by age 55. So I say that for a couple of reasons. I say it because anxiety is a real issue. Even though they're not breaking into your car or stealing your iPhone or selling drugs on the corner, anxiety is a problem in youth because if left untreated and if maladaptive and interfering, it has these sequelae. So yes, we definitely need to address it. But you'll notice the last line on the slide is, do we want to remove anxiety? And the answer is no. Anxiety is a good thing when it's at a moderate level. So what I want to encourage us to think about is not getting rid of anxiety, but helping kids learn the skills to manage it. It's going to happen. It's normal. But what are some things that we can identify as maybe they're getting a little too anxious? And what are some things and how can they be done to just dial it back, dial it down a little bit? So at the end of tonight, there's no exam. So you can feel free to pay attention or not. You can feel free to ask questions or not. That'll go through Gino. But when you ask questions, I just want to mention one thing real quick. In my profession, my ethics code, I'm not allowed to talk about individual cases without having a professional relationship with the individual. So if you were to ask a question about my 7-year-old son does blah, 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 that isn't the way it would work best for me. The way it would work best for me is if there were a 7-year-old boy who did something like this, then I can address it generically, okay? So I just ask that we keep it generic. It's not like you're pretending it's not your kid or anything. It just helps me address the questions more reasonably. So, okay. And again, it's taking me 5 clicks to get this thing to advance. That's an unusual thing. All right. So what are the cognitive features of anxiety? What are the behavioral features? What are some things schools can do? And what are some things parents can do? All right. For those of you interested in and perhaps already schooled about psychology and cognitive functioning, this is going to be familiar. But for many people, it's new and different. And that is the cognitive perspective that an anxious person has is different from the cognitive processing that non-anxious people have. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples to illustrate that. First thing is automatic thoughts. It may sound like it's crazy, but it's not. We all talk to ourselves. We have an inner dialogue. And that inner dialogue is usually this way and then that way, and then what about this and what about that? And there's a sort of back and forth. Most of the inner dialogue as an adult, we can reflect back on. As kids, they don't have that level. They don't have metacognition yet. If they're 8, 9, 10, they haven't matured to the point where their cognitive functioning allows them to really think about their own thinking a whole lot. So metacognition hasn't kicked in, but we do have these automatic thoughts. Many of us have similar ones. And if you have good friends or people you've known all your life, they can almost tell you what you're thinking because they know your inner thoughts because you've shared them and you've gotten to get some feedback and stuff. A lot of people, especially anxious people, they don't share their inner thinking sometimes, and it can be isolating. But I'll put that aside for a minute. Let's go to now cognitive processes. Cognitive processes are how you think about the automatic thoughts, what your next thinking pathway from that automatic thought. And I hope you don't mind, I'm going to use a 4-letter word to illustrate the point. Imagine that you're walking from your car across a grassy area to a place where you're going to have a meeting or go shopping or something, and you step in a pile a dog left behind. What thought pops into your head? Oh, shit. And you probably look down and you probably go, oh, shit. And then how do you process that? What are the next sets of thoughts? Well, for an anxious person, those thoughts are, what's going to happen? Why me? How do I get this off my feet? Can you get sick from this? Oh, I have a hole in my shoe. There's germs. Maybe I'm going to die. I'm going to have to tell people I stepped in it because it smells, and they're going to think I don't shower. But if I tell them I stepped in dog poo first, then when they smell it, they won't think it's because I don't shower. The anxious person processes that negative step, the misstep, as personal threat, social judgment, and physical danger. That's the cognitive processing that they bring to the situation. A depressed kid thinks differently. A depressed kid steps in it, says, oh shit, and then says, I can't even walk. That stuff's been there for days. Nobody else stepped in it. I'm an idiot. The angry person blames the dog for leaving the mess. The bottom line is, we all have negative events like stepping in poo, but we process it differently. And as a confident adult, it's sometimes hard to recognize that the kid's processing is different from ours. And the anxious kid's processing is in particular concerned about social judgment, physical danger, novelty, ego threat, things like that. Okay? Now, the next line is attributions. That's post-event. That's looking back on experiences. Anxious kids aren't particularly wrong in their attributions about events. Then you get to cognitive structures. That's the personality, the reinforcement history, the schema, life experience, whatever you want to call it. It influences how you process future events. So why are we talking about all this cognitive stuff? Because your kids are in a environmental situation, COVID. They're going to have automatic thoughts about things. They're going to process things in certain ways. And if it's particularly anxiety provoking, and if it goes unnoticed, it could get worse, and it could lead to severe problems later on. So let's pretend that you are an overly confident, and just for fun, I'll use the word stupid, an overly confident, stupid person who you think, I'm not going to get COVID. I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm going to go wrestle with people, and I'm going to play basketball in a gym, and I'm going to do everything because I'm not going to get it. I don't care. Well, that kind of cognitive processing is going to influence the observer, the kid. Let's say you're the person who is appropriately conscientious about it. You can tell my bias. Appropriately conscientious about COVID. You're going to be wearing a mask. But let's say the kid forgets his mask or her mask. That's normal kid stuff. Kids don't remember everything. And it could become a source of tension where you then say, oh, you have to wear your mask. And it becomes a little bit of this tension between the parent and the kid. And then the kid may want to be a little bit more independent. I don't have to wear it. You can't make me. A good strategy there is to recognize the cognitive processing of the kid. This is all new to me. It's all fearful. It's all concerning. People are worried about dying. I hear about it every day. And make it a matter of, we both need to remember to wear our masks. Can you help remind me? And I'll help remind you. This is new for me too. I may forget. Let's remind each other about the mask. And it becomes more of a collaborative process as opposed to a parental and potentially conflicted process. Recognizing that their automatic thoughts are not going to be as, they're going to be more catastrophic. That anxious kids are going to have more anticipated catastrophes. As adults, we might have some anticipated catastrophes as well. Best if we not burden the kids with it. At age 7, you don't want to be talking about every little detail and every biochemical feature of a germ. And so just here's what we need to do. Provide a sense of security and not emphasize exceptionally anxiety-provoking kinds of thoughts. And you'll notice up in the corner I have the green self-talk. What we want to develop for maintaining non-anxious behavior or maintaining skills to manage anxiety is a healthy self-talk. And a healthy self-talk in the COVID environment is, this is lousy. I can't do what I want to do. It affects everybody. And I live in a place that's crowded. It's not the middle of Montana. So I have to cooperate. And that means wearing a mask and staying distant and not eating in restaurants and other things. And darn it, I don't like it. But I'm going to do it because the consequences of not doing it may not be as good. So I have to bite the bullet. If you can go public with your personal self-talk, which is like what I was just doing there, the kids are going to hear that. And without you even telling them, they internalize it. It's an interesting phenomena about child development. External verbal behavior, often by parents, when repeated over and over and over and over, even when you don't tell the kid to listen, they hear it and they internalize it. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. It's sort of a joke. When I was a kid, I had braces, and my parents had no money, so paying for braces was a big deal. And every time I left the house, my mom would say, "Did you brush your teeth? Did you brush your teeth?" You know, I grabbed the back door. I'm about to leave. "Did you brush your teeth?" "Yes." You know, I'm quite old now, and when I grab the back door to leave the house, I can hear her say, "Did you brush your teeth?" You know, it's like, "Yes, Mom." She's been dead for decades. You know, you internalize that self-talk. So think about your role as a parent, verbalizing out loud things that you want your kid to internalize so they will process the events in a certain way. You don't want to hyper anxiety provoke them about COVID. You don't want it to be, "Oh my God, don't touch this. Oh my God, we can't go here. Oh my God." The more distress you display, the more you create an inner dialogue that is not helpful. You want to validate the worries. Yes, it sucks. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, there are problems. Yes, it's not what we want, but under the circumstances, this is the best we can do. So let's plow ahead. Okay, we're going to come back to some of these things, but let's move on. And again, it's taking me 5 clicks to switch, but that's okay. Let's talk about the behavioral side. Now, almost everyone knows punishment and reward, but there are some subtle differences. Escape and avoidance, that's very important for anxiety, and some subtle differences in punishment and reward as well. So bear with me if you know some of this. Everyone knows punishment is kid makes a certain behavior and it leads to a negative outcome. That is ineffective with anxious kids. If you want a shift away from anxiety, punishment is not a good solution. Contrast that with reward. Reward is a good solution, but only with the following qualifier. Many times parents recognize reward's the way to go, and they reward and reward, but they reward for quality of performance. Like, oh, you did really well. You got an A, or you did this really well, or you scored a goal, or whatever. That tends to increase perfectionism. That tends to increase high standards, which most of the time we all don't live up to, and you're anxious about it. So punishment's not good, but reward for effort, not reward for the quality of the performance, reward for effort. You gave it a try. You did a good job, good effort. That maintains engagement, maintains an interest in doing well, but does so without increasing the anxiety. All right, now let's go to escape and avoidance. And here's a subtle difference. Excuse me, I got a little bug in my throat. Escape is when you make a response that stops a negative condition. You're at an event, everyone's making fun of you, there are drugs being used, you don't want to be there, so you leave. That's an escape response. That's healthy. You made a response, it stopped the negative condition. No problem. Avoidance is different. Avoidance is when an individual makes a response that the individual believes it will stop the negative condition, but it doesn't really. They just think it does. Avoidance is when you make a response which you think will prevent something negative from happening. So I'll give you a silly example. I didn't climb Mount Everest because I didn't want to die, and I didn't die, therefore am I glad I didn't climb Mount Everest. It's like, well, wait a minute. That's not the same thing. I'm avoiding doing something because of a catastrophic outcome. When the catastrophic outcome doesn't happen, I then think it was a good avoidance. And that's where the anxiety comes in. Avoidance, which is up there in the corner in blue, is the key take-home word here. Anxious people avoid doing things because they think there's a catastrophe attached, and they think if they avoid it, it'll prevent the catastrophe. But it's not linked. They just think it is. If I don't pet the dog, I won't get bitten. So they don't pet the dog. They avoid all dogs because they don't want to ever get bitten. And when you avoid the dog and you don't get bitten, you walk away going, ah, look at that. I didn't get bitten. See that? I avoided the dog. That was smart. The positive experience of not getting bitten is almost reinforcing the avoidance. And that's a cycle that anxious people have. So if you think about COVID and you think about anxiety in youth, escape is fine. If they want to remove themselves from a room because everyone's not wearing a mask, that's safe. But if they don't want to go here, or they don't want to go there, or they won't do this, or they won't do that, because they believe there's a catastrophe attached, and it probably isn't, we don't want to allow the avoidance. So avoidance is a good thing to look out for. Unnecessary, staying away from doing things out of fear that there's a consequence when the consequence isn't really connected. All right, that's the behavioral part. All right, let's get to what can schools do. Um, you might find the word accommodation used. In Canada, for example, accommodations was a national mandate. They wanted all kids to have all necessary accommodations in order to achieve fully in schools. And in the US, we also have accommodations to help kids. Most of them are great. If the child has a hearing problem, they sit in the front row, they get to hear the teacher. If they have a wheelchair, they get a ramp. Accommodations in general are great, but here's a kink. Accommodations for anxiety, notice without a plan, aren't a good thing. An accommodation might be okay if there's a plan, but an accommodation without a plan actually makes anxiety worse. Let me give you an example. The child says, I'm afraid to eat in the cafeteria. And so the school says, okay, you can eat in the guidance counselor's office. That is an accommodation for the anxious avoidance of eating in the cafeteria. That's going to maintain the anxiety. Each time you eat in the counselor's office, it confirms. See that? Good thing I'd eat in the cafeteria, because whatever I thought bad would have happened might have happened. So it ends up making it worse. An accommodation for anxiety with a plan is okay. You're afraid to eat in the cafeteria. Today, you can eat in the counselor's office. Next time, the counselor will bring one of your friends and you'll eat together. Then the counselor, you and one of your friends are going to eat in the cafeteria. So there's a plan to overcome the anxiety. In the absence of the plan, the accommodation actually makes it worse. Okay, what can schools do to help? This is really obvious, but so important, and I know your schools do it. Be predictable and secure. Anxiety is made worse by unpredictability. Think of unpredictable and explosive. Think of walking from where you live for a mile in your neighborhood to a restaurant, only somewhere along there are hidden 10 landmines. You're going to walk really carefully, and you're going to be, like, oh my God, I got to watch where I step. And let's say that there happens to be a 10-cent dime piece blue signal of the landmine. So if you look on the ground and you see a little blue circle the size of a dime, that's a landmine. You're going to really walk carefully, and you're not going to jog. You're not going to look at the trees or the scenery. You're going to be watching the ground with care. Predictable is great. Predictable means you know what's going to happen. There's a schedule. It gives security. And for kids who are anxious, especially in a pandemic, it provides safety and security. It's relaxing to know this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And I don't have to walk carefully like there are landmines. The unpredictability of landmines is not good. Okay, the next thing on this one is tolerating uncertainty. And I'm just going to go off on a little tangent just for a minute. Psychology has done pretty well as a discipline, but sometimes we rediscover the same thing over and over and over and just give it a new name. It's like, oh, that again, relabeled. This is new and different. This is a concept that hasn't been around for a long time and explains a lot of the variance. So I would say this is worth paying attention to. Anxious individuals have this need to know. Not bad to ask questions, not bad to need to know. But for the anxious person, it comes with an inability to accept the answer, we don't know. So if a kid says, is there life after death? The answer is, we don't know. And we have to accept that we don't know. We might have religious beliefs, we might have fantasies, we might have hopes, we might, whatever. But we don't know, so you just have to accept we don't know. If a tree falls in the woods, does it make noise? I don't know. If I leave a tape recorder, I'll find out. But in the absence of that, tolerating uncertainty. Very good trait for anxious kids to learn. And the way you'll see it in a kid is they'll repeatedly ask for reassurance when they don't have an ability to tolerate uncertainty. But what if this happens? 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 Is it going to rain on my birthday? Is it going to rain on my birthdays? And that repeated need for reassurance comes from an inability to tolerate uncertainty. So to the extent you can, it's really good, especially for schools, to be able to tolerate uncertainty. To say, here's a question, we don't know the answer. It's okay that we don't know the answer. We're going to work on it. We'll try and figure it out. But right now, we just don't know. Not that we haven't tried, but it's okay that we don't know. We're working on it.
Dr. Kendall, do these three strategies that you've gone over so far, as talking about what schools can do those same strategies apply to parents in the home, to situations like I know a couple of questions that came in prior to this evening talked about children being afraid to sleep in their bed at night. And so I think that analogy, the scenario you gave with students being afraid to eat in the cafeteria is similar. So do the same strategies apply for parents?
So I don't mean for this to be entirely a joke, but if I were to just click to the next slide, you'd see some of the same terms under what can parents do. So the answer is yes. Yes, they do apply. Yep. Slightly different frame, but yes. So let's talk about modeling. Think of the potency of a kid who's witnessing an adult making sense of an experience. Just imagine, if you will, you're 8 or 9 or 10 or 12, whatever, and you're just standing next to your aunt or uncle, and that person is explaining something. Let's say you're in the back seat of a car and you're 8 or 9 or 10, and you're not driving, you're just looking out the window or looking at an iPad or something, and the person driving is talking out loud, saying the following: "Oh my God, there are all these idiots out here. I can't believe all these jerks. I should have stayed home. Nobody drives worth a damn. Damn it, oh, look at that jerk, son of a gun. I'll ram him in the back next time I see him driving." The kid is in the back seat soaking that up. What they're learning is driving is dangerous. There are idiots in the world. And if somebody gives you a reason to, you should ram them. What schools can do to really, really help with anxiety in kids is to model coping, is to model things like, this pandemic is a pain in the neck. There are headaches that come with it, meaning things we have to do we don't like. But for the benefit of everyone, we'll put up with it for now. Sometimes it'll be frustrating, I know, and sometimes I'll forget, but I'm going to do my best, because in the end, it's worth the effort. We'll all pull together. And when they start thinking and talking like that out loud, the kids hear it, just like the kid in the back seat, and they soak it up. And in anticipation of Gino's question, and hopefully I'll get to the next slide, what can parents do? So, and notice up in the right-hand corner, the buzzword is modeling. Parents are really powerful models. I'm talking powerful. And I'm going to give you an example, and I hope you can see it from the camera and stuff. But I'm going to go back to when I have 2 sons. They're now young adults. But I'm going to go back to when they were roughly 8 or 10 years old. And it was early in the morning, about 6 o'clock. I was at my computer in a different part of the house, and I was typing at my computer. And my son came in and said, "Dad, I need to do something," his homework, "that I need to fix. Can I use the computer?" We only had one at the time. And I was sitting there with a pencil over my ear, doing my work. And as soon as he asked me, my inner dialogue was, "No, I'm working, go away." And I remembered that song, Cat's Cradle. "No, go away, kid, you bother me." And then 10 years later, the kid wants to do something with the dad, and "No, go away, you bother me." And then the dad wants to do something with the kid, and the kid says, "No, Dad, I'm busy." So that song had an impact. And I said, "Okay, wait a minute." And I was typing. I said, "Let me finish this paragraph. How much time do you need?" He said 10 minutes. I said, "All right, let me finish this. You can have it for 10 minutes. And so I get done. I get up. My son sits down, and he puts his pencil over his ear. I was like full tilt psychologist. I'm going, oh my God, why did he put a pencil over his ear? Is this a phallic symbol that needs to be near the occipital lobes of the brain? No. Did his teacher ever say, so-and-so, this is a pencil. This is a pencil holder. Please now insert your pencil in it. No. No one has ever told him to do it. He just saw me do it. Why was I embarrassed when my son took his bagel, broke it in half, and dumped it in his milk at graduation? Because I know where he learned to dunk. Dunking is not genetic. I never told him, Reed, get that thing soggy before you put it in your mouth. Never said that. He just watched me do it. Modeling is very powerful. If you want to have a favorable impact on child anxiety during the pandemic, you want to model coping, not mastery, not like it's perfect. Here's my master. This, everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. I'm going to do this, do this, do this. Model coping. Model, this is a pain. We got to deal with it. The mask helps. It's not perfect, but it helps a ton, so I'm going to wear it. Got to wash my hands more than usual. When the pandemic's over, I won't have to wash my hands this much. You know, and remember self-talk? So you verbalize, and modeling. You demonstrate coping with the problem. Not that it's not a real problem. Don't pretend it's not real. Don't pretend you've mastered it, but model coping with it. And the kids will pick it up. Not instantly, but over time. All right, so let's go back to the chart. What can parents do? I have to be careful because I'm going to use a term that has some potential misunderstanding. So the phrase I want to use is neglect, non-benign neglect. Now, parental neglect is not a good thing, but non-benign neglect. In other words, back up a little bit and let the kid do things on their own a little bit and learn from the experience. I bet everyone has climbed a tree. And, well, I'll speak for myself. I've climbed a tree. And when I climb the tree, I go up and I go up, or even recently cleaning gutters at my house, you go up the ladder and you get to a certain point, you go slowly and you get more careful because you realize, I'm up pretty high. I got to be careful here. Your body gives you signals of when to be nervous about the height of the climb. Parents of anxious kids, don't let the kids learn their own antenna for risk. They step in and prevent it. The kid gets on the ladder and they go, don't go up there, it's too high. Don't go too high. Watch your step, be careful. Their involvement is intrusive. Non-benign neglect would be, let the kid go up the ladder a little bit and they'll get to a point where they feel uncomfortable. And you might even go up the ladder yourself and say, got to make sure it's tight at the top, got to make sure there's weights at the bottom, and it's clicked it in gear. Okay, it feels firm. I'll just go up 2 or 3 steps, see how it feels. Okay, maybe one more. Maybe one more. Oh, this feels good. They get to see modeling, and it's non-intrusive involvement. If you anticipate and tell them to be careful too soon, they don't get to learn the antenna that tell them when it's too high to climb. I think I twisted that example a little bit, but I hope you followed it. I usually look at the slides, but I was looking at faces, and a few people smiled and nodded. So thank you. So I think I twisted the example a little bit, but I think you got it. Second one is validate and tolerate negative emotions. The kid says, I'm really worried about something. Don't say, don't worry, relax. Because a lot of kids don't know how to relax. And so that becomes like, no, don't tell me you're nervous. Go speak Swahili. Well, they don't know how to speak Swahili either. So when you say, go relax, they don't know how to do it. Validate the emotion. Say, okay, sounds like you're distressed about something. That could happen. You know, what is it? And assuming it's reasonable, like I took a test and I didn't do well, and it's because I didn't study, and I feel lousy. Okay, they're going to learn from that. Tolerate the negative emotions. It's okay to feel lousy because you didn't do what you wanted to do. What can you do differently next time? Don't make it that the negative emotion is bad. Like, don't feel that way, or you shouldn't do that, or it's your own fault. It's okay to have some anxiety in situations like COVID. I was a regular basketball player for 50 years of my life, twice a week up until March 11th of last year. And I haven't played twice a week since March 11th of last year. Makes me a little angry. I'm going to tolerate that negative emotion. But there were times when some of the guys texted me and said, we're going to go play 4-on-4 outdoors. You want to join me? And I was so tempted. I said, no, I think I'm going to let it go. I'm going to pass. Because I started getting a little anxious, not about myself so much, but what if I bring it home? What if my wife gets it? What if other people get it? I think that anxiety is reasonable and normal. If your kids express anxiety in situations like that, validate it. It's okay. You feel anxious. It's okay. And tolerate it a little bit. Don't try to fix it immediately, like instant step in and solve it for them. Okay, the next thing on the list, just like for schools, be predictable and not punitive. A little routine provides security. Kids are less anxious when there's a sense of security. Just like schools modeling. You as a parent, taking off on Gino's request about, sleeping in the bed, and the example is the same. It's okay to have an accommodation. Yes, you can sleep in our bed now, but next time what we'll do is we'll lie down for a few minutes, and then we'll go to your room, and then there'll be a book or a lamp or something you can do, or then we'll transition to sleeping in the other place. So it's okay to accommodate a little if there's an initial distress that's real, but you have to have a plan for weaning away from it. Don't let it become routine, because then it gets worse. Tolerate uncertainty. And I'm going to emphasize tolerate uncertainty. It's hard sometimes for parents, but I would emphasize it a lot. When the kid says, what do I do? What do I do? We don't know. Here's what we think we know. We're trying. We're going to do our best. We're working on it. This is the best we can do right now, and we'll go from there. The last one on this list is safety behaviors. And I would have said, any day other than today, I probably would have said safety behaviors are not good. But under the pandemic situation, I think temporarily they're okay. So if a kid has to wear a certain mask, rather than just any mask, they have to wear a certain one, and it gives them a little security, and maybe it's unnecessary, and maybe it's anxiety about consequences of wearing a different mask or whatever, that would be called a safety behavior. I think it would be okay to tolerate that a little bit. It would be great if you could wean them away from it, but a little bit of safety behaviors in a pandemic is probably okay.
Dr. Kendall, we have a question in the chat, and the question is, please give mechanisms, examples to teach children to tolerate uncertainty when a child doesn't become more anxious. He simply refuses to accept, I don't know, and is unable to understand the variables.
Great question. If the kid's 4 or 14, the answer is very different. Because at 14, they can engage in a little inner dialogue with themselves. They can engage, not necessarily with their parent, but they can engage in a dialogue about the topic with peers, certainly. But a 4-year-old is more likely to just want the answer. And sometimes explanations like the following can help. Well, here's a potato. I have to sort it into the big potatoes or the small potatoes. This one is, oh, this is big. Oh, this one's small. Oh, this one's big. Oh, this one's big. Oh, this one. Well, it's not big, but it's bigger than the small one, but it's not small, but I have to sort it into the big or the small. Yeah, I'll put it in the small. It's not perfect, but nothing's perfect. You model that sometimes uncertainty is part of life. You model things like we're driving somewhere, we think it's going to take a half an hour. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll take 40 minutes. Maybe we'll get there in 20. We don't know. But 30 is a good average. In other words, modeling, tolerating uncertainty. If the kid's 4 and saying, I need to know, I think the best answer you can give is to say, as best as I can tell you, here's the answer. After that, I don't have any other answers. We can go Google it. We can look it up. But sometimes there's just not going to be a solid answer. It's not like 4 and 4 is 8. This one is more probabilities. Now, just for the sake of discussion on that topic, this is for anxious kids. Other kids may not need the same level of non-intrusive involvement, the same level of modeling, the same level of tolerating uncertainty. This is the focus on anxious kids. Any other questions in the chat, Gino?
Yeah, one more just came in, and here's the question. Can an accommodation be used if the result is an important one? For example, an accommodation gets a kid to school every day instead of anxiety derailing the school day. Is that still a bad thing to do?
Gotcha. That's a good question also. It's going to depend on a lot of the details. So usually accommodations for things other than anxiety are good. And usually accommodations for things that are maintained by anxiety make anxiety worse. However, if the consequences, and I think the example is a good one, if the consequences of a little bit of an accommodation is worse, like the kid says, I have to wear this hat to school, otherwise I'm not going to school. So you let the kid wear the hat. You're accommodating, but they go to school. That to me is not a big problem. But if there's accommodations for avoidance, accommodations that are leading to beliefs about the catastrophe, if I don't wear the hat, I'm going to go prematurely bald, so I have to wear the hat. Well, you don't want to let the kid wear the hat to confirm that he or she could go prematurely bald. That would support the inaccurate beliefs. So I think more details needed. If it's temporary and the consequences are much worse, then wear the hat. But if it's attached to avoidance of a catastrophe that's not real, then I would say wear the hat one day and then wear a different hat and then maybe don't wear a hat. Have a plan to fade it away.
Thank you. Those are all the questions for now.
By the way, parents who have children who are extreme on anxiety, maladaptive, interfering at the level of a disorder, 100% of the parents report some degree of accommodation, just to make their day. So if you find that you have an anxious child and you do it a little bit, that's very common, almost universal. The problem is when it becomes multiple accommodations for multiple avoidances, and then it becomes maintaining the anxiety. Much, much worse when it's multiple accommodations, and much worse when they're attached to an anticipated catastrophe that's not real.
Dr. Kendall, another question on that pertains to this slide came in. When your child is not satisfied with the "I'm not sure" answer, is it appropriate to validate that it's making them feel worried not to know the answer? So maybe we can do some things that help us feel calm when we don't know an answer. For example, listen to music, draw, dance it out, etc.
Yeah, those are all reasonable. But I think keeping in mind, as long as the motivation is that we're going to tolerate some uncertainty, those are okay. But if it becomes just another avoidance, then it wouldn't be good. Like, oh, you feel uncomfortable? Well, we have to do this because those uncomfortable feelings are real bad. So now we have to get away from them. It's more like, okay, you feel a little uncomfortable. We can tolerate the uncomfortable feelings, and we just don't know the answer. By the way, one thing that we do when we work with anxious kids, there's a tendency to repeatedly ask for reassurance, and they will ask and ask and ask. And so we'll set limits. We'll say things like, okay, you can ask me 3 questions today, and I can ask you 3 questions. And then we'll keep track of the number of times. And some parents have picked up on that and done that as well, where you can ask me, and you can ask me again, but after that, I've already told you. And you have to kind of bite the bullet, if that's the right term. You have to stick with it. Once you do that, you have to stick with it. Because if they ask you 10 times and then you answer again, they're learning, oh, I just need to ask more. And he or she will give me an answer. You have to stick with it. If you say you can ask once or twice and that's it, you have to stick with it. And I apologize. I realize I'm looking at your faces over here, but my screen is over here. So you're looking in my ear. Sorry for that. Let me move my camera. There we go. Now you can't zoom snoop quite as much in the room either. But anyway, that's a little bit better. Okay. I've been talking about anxiety in general. I'm an expert, quote unquote, on anxiety. We talk about it with reference to the pandemic, but you're an expert on your kids. You know your kids. And so you have to make some adjustments and some tweaks a little bit to make it work or to feel well with your kids. But a couple of things to keep in mind. Anxiety is normal. So if your kid is anxious about the pandemic, don't think of it as a sign of mental health distress. Only if it's interfering and excessive. So if you say, let's go for a walk the dog, and they've always done that, and now they're willing to walk the dog, fine. If they're not willing to walk the dog now because there's germs in the air and they can't leave their room, that would be maladaptive and interfering. But if they're willing to walk the dog and they're wearing a mask and they're doing everything proper, that's probably just normal anxiety. So I don't want you to anticipate that just because they're showing some anxious distress in this difficult environment, that's automatically a disorder level. It could just be normal range stuff. If it gets to the extreme, maladaptive, interfering, high levels of avoidance, etc. And I think I should mention this. Gino has set up some arrangements at the schools. So we have actually some staff that are experts in working with anxious kids who are hooked up with the schools. So Haddonfield is on top of the issue. But keep in mind, a lot of anxiety is normal, and especially in a pandemic. I mean, when I grew up, admittedly, it was a different time, but you could ride your bike to school. You can still do that. A lot of kids probably in the Haddonfield district ride their bike to school. And you can ride your bike to school and ride home after school and go to the park and play. Kids probably still do that. But now with a pandemic, you really can't. There are limits on what used to be normal, outgoing activities that build confidence, that build a sense of security. And those are being clipped, you know. But it's reasonable. In a pandemic, it's reasonable to have these precautions and to not be able to do certain things unless you're masked or unless this or unless that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is anxiety is normal. Don't overreact if you see normal range levels of distress. So I want to go to the next slide real quick, if I can get it to work. There we go. And I just want to talk about something that's important to me and I think to all parents, and that's medications. Oftentimes, it's the first pathway that when people seek help for kids with anxiety problems, they immediately seek options that include medications. There's nothing necessarily right or wrong about that. It just seems to be our American culture that we go there a little bit quickly. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about medications as an option, learning psychological strategies to manage anxiety as an option, and then the combination of the two and how things turn out over time. So let me get to this slide here. So these are 458 kids, large sample, treated in UCLA, Duke, University of Pittsburgh, Temple University, Columbia University, and Johns Hopkins University. So these are 458 kids from all over the country being seen at major centers. The medication is Zoloft or sertraline. The psychological treatment is called CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. This particular version of it is called the coping cat, and the PBO is placebo. Receiving the combination, 4 out of 5 kids did pretty well. Receiving just the CBT, 60%, 4 to 10 did well. Sertraline medication, 55% did well. And pill placebo, about 24%. And this has some important implications. It really says you have 3 treatments that work: the psychological treatment, the medication, or their combination. All 3 qualify as significantly better than a pill placebo. And this is just one study, albeit with 458 kids. There are many other studies similar, some in other countries. Now let's look at it over time. You start out, these kids are at 20, which is quite high. They end up at 8 or 10 or 12. That's all normal range. So they come down and it's significant. We're happy. Interesting observation though. The medication line, which is the blue line, most of the effects are during the initial 4 weeks. As soon as you start taking the medication, the effects happen. In the psychological treatment, the effects are mostly in the last 4 weeks. It takes a cumulative period of time. They end up at the same point. The green and the blue are at the same point. But the medication is quicker, and the psychological skill building approach takes longer, with most of the change happening at the end. And I say that because as parents, you might say, well, we tried the psychological treatment, but it didn't work. Well, you might have to wait longer. It's a 4-month process, and most of the action happens in the last month, last 6 weeks. Where if you take medications, you will see the effects more quickly. However, now let's go way out. This is week 36. We've actually followed these kids up 12 years after treatment. All 3 groups, all 3 treatment groups end up in the same place. And as you can see, they came down and they stayed down. Interestingly, the kids on medications are still taking the medications. The kids who received the psychological treatment discontinued. And so they maintained their gains in the absence of continued treatment. So you get some nice maintenance. All 3 are effective. One's a little quicker, one takes a little more time, and one has a little bit better data for long-term maintenance. Okay, what I want to do at this point is leave it open for questions and discussion and chat or whatever you guys want to do. I have enough slides that I could talk for a whole semester, call it a graduate course. But I don't think that's what you guys would want to go through or would serve the needs the best. I think if we leave it open for some questions and discussion, I think that'll serve us best. So that's what I'd like to do, if that's okay with you, Gino.
Dr. Kendall, that's great. And so what we'll do is we'll allow you to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. And in the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit about the program that Dr. Kendall referenced that we established in Haddonfield shortly after the start of the school year. So Dr. Kendall is, and tell me if I get the title wrong, the executive director.
Gino, just call me Phil, please.
Well, Phil's the executive director of the Child and Adolescent Anxiety Disorders Clinic at Temple University.
Yeah.
So we endeavored to have a partnership with them whereby 2 of their graduate level clinicians are working in the school district 1 day a week. And our school counselors and our child study team members have been made aware that they can refer students to receive support through those graduate level clinicians. And the support can look a few different ways. One, that support can just be consultation to the school counselors and the teaching staff. It could be direct services provided by the graduate level clinicians, or it can involve an expedited referral to the Child and Adolescent Anxiety Disorders Clinic at Temple University. And we're so far thrilled with the with the results. The feedback from our staff has been fantastic, and it's a program that we hope to continue not only this year, but hopefully in the future, based on the success that we're having this year. And if you believe that your child is in need of that level of service, please contact your school counselor. That is the gateway to access that service. And if you have any general questions about that, please, or you just want more general information, you can contact your school counselor, or you can contact me directly. You certainly can find my email address on the website. So,
if I
yeah,
could
go
just
ahead.
briefly add, and we're doing everything telehealth right now. Everything's on Zoom.
Okay, so I see a hand raised. It looks like Jamie,
Yes.
Jami.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Kendall. Thank you for your time. I'm just curious about the messaging contributing to children's anxiety. It seems that there's a vast discrepancy between what's going on with school. We're allowed to be in school. I mean, we're not allowed to be in school, yet we're still having sports. And I just don't know how this is going to work with the kids processing it. It's almost, I fear that we're going to be the little boy that cried wolf. It's okay, get out there and run track or play lacrosse and go to a clinic, but you can't learn where you're sitting. And I'm just very confused about the stance as far as a parent, like what we should be doing.
Yeah, that's not only is that a good question, it's a question that's bigger than me in the sense of I can give you my observations, but it's probably a systems level question or a gubernatorial level question. I find it a little hypocritical to say you can't have school, but you can't have sports, or you can have this sport, but not that sport. Or and then this is just me waxing a little cynical, so I apologize. But it's like, well, it depends on the financial arrangements. Like in certain states, they make a fortune off of football, so you can play football. It's like, wait a minute, we shouldn't be making the decisions based on that. So in my world, which I'm not in control, sorry, that's probably a good thing, but in my world, I think it should be a uniform decision. Schools, classes, sports, extracurricular activities, or have some criteria if there are more than 4 people, or if you have to be at least 6 feet apart, or some rules. I don't know how it's happening in New Jersey. I don't know the details in Haddonfield. But you asked the question a little differently than my answer. You asked the question is, how do you explain it to your kid? And I would answer that with tolerate uncertainty. I would answer it with, sometimes people make decisions that are different than the ones we'd make. I know a house that you painted purple and green. I wouldn't paint my house purple and green. But, people are different. And if it were me, I might do it differently, but that's the way they're doing it. And maybe when you grow up, you can get elected and be governor and you'd handle it a little better. So I would think tolerating the uncertainty, acknowledging the, so to speak, hypocrisy. But that's, as one of my relatives used to say, that's above my pay grade.
Mine too. Thank you very much for your information tonight and for joining us. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Well, thanks for asking a question, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Does anyone else have a question? You can either just go ahead and unmute yourself and speak, or you can raise your hand, and then Carlin, go ahead. You have the floor.
You knew I would have another question, right?
Yeah.
Hi. My question is regarding children who don't necessarily cognitively, children with special needs, for instance,
Okay.
who don't necessarily understand when an explanation is given that says, "I can't answer your question. I don't know the answer." And the question may be about concern for a friend who has not been in school, or a teacher who's been out, or something else, whatever. Or a family member's been sick and in the hospital. Are they going to be okay? Those types of questions. And we may be speaking about an older child, perhaps a teenager, but also this person may have special needs.
Okay.
I'm doing my best. I don't know is not a sufficient answer for an inquiring mind who understands that there are some ways that this could be explained.
Yeah.
That person may know that. It's just, it becomes very difficult.
This is under the umbrella of it helps to provide security, and kids with special needs or younger kids, providing a sense of security is a good thing. And sometimes that means parents giving concrete and confident answers that may not be exactly right. If the kid says, "Oh, I don't want to ride in the car, it's dangerous," and you say, "Oh no, it's safe to ride on the New Jersey Turnpike at 80 miles an hour. It's fine. You'll be okay." You're being confident, and you're providing a sense of security, and you may be overstating it a little bit. Sometimes that answer for the younger kids builds security. For slightly older kids who have special needs, will help build security. So it's not like you're lying to them, but you're presenting it as this is going to build more security in their perception of the world, and it's a safe way to proceed, even though you may be stretching it a dash.
And I'm just going to finish with this, and yet it's impossible to say, because I truly don't know if somebody's going to be okay.
Right.
I truly don't know if a relative is going to be all right. Those types of things. I truly don't know if we're going to have a vaccine in a month or 2 months or 3 months. And these are very good questions.
Yeah. And again, it's going to depend on the individual child. So this may have to be tweaked a little bit. But to the extent that it's not making the anxiety worse, I think answers like, "We were told we're going to get a vaccine in 2 months." And I apologize if this sounds political. I don't mean for it to. But the source of the information about getting a vaccine in 1 month, I didn't believe it. But here's another source that's telling me I'm going to get it in 2 months, and I believe that. So let's wait and see if a month or two we can get a vaccine, and then we'll find out. So I think you could have a little dialogue around the unknowing, the not knowing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we tend, in our field, we tend to talk about possibilities and probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it depends on the child. But if they want a concrete answer, and without it they get anxious, we'll talk about, well, it's possible, but it's not likely. The Eagles could have made the playoffs this year, but it was a stretch. I mean, they had troubles with their receivers and their quarterback and their coach, and they had losses, and other teams had to lose for them to get in. So it's possible, but not probable.
Mm-hmm.
Where, Buffalo is probable. I mean, they had 11 wins going in. They're
right?
like,
come on, seriously.
And so what you do is you don't make them expect an answer that is yes or no or 100% accurate. You talk possibilities and probabilities and accept that. You tolerate that as an answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've been trying something like that, and we're trying to find what the limits are. That is something that's, this hypothetical kid, something that this child can work within. Thanks very much.
Yeah, sure. By the way, when I threw the Eagles in there in Buffalo, I did that on purpose. I find that when we talk to kids, find something that they're interested in, Pokemon or TikTok, whatever it is, and use that for your examples. You know, if you're just talking about COVID and they can't see it and they can't smell it or anything, it's difficult. But if you use stuff that they can relate to, it really helps a ton. So that's kind of why I threw the Eagles in there, because I figured that would keep your interest a little bit. Assuming you're not from North Jersey.
Great idea. Thank you.
Okay, Phil, those are all the questions. So I'd like to thank you and thank all of our participants. Some parting announcements. First, once again, thank you to the Haddonfield Education Association and Stacy Brown Downham for writing the grant that made this night possible. We will do a companion presentation geared more for students in grades 9 through 12 on February 3rd at 7 o'clock. And if you registered for that, you'll automatically get the link again, similar to how we did this. If you or any of your friends or neighbors are interested in signing up, please, they can contact me directly. Again, my name is Gino Priolo. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Schools. My contact information is on the website. And finally, if you believe your child is in need of some support, our school counselors are prepared to help support them. If you believe that they may need something a little differently than what our school counselors provide, talked about the clinical graduate students from Temple's Anxiety Clinic that are in district 1 day a week, and they can provide consultative support or direct services, or help you provide an expedited referral to the Anxiety Center at Temple University. With that, we we'll be sending out a brief survey. Should hit your email inboxes around 8:30. Please take the time to fill that out so we can get some formative feedback to see how well received these kinds of presentations are and how we can do better in the future. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. And thank you so much for your active participation. Thanks.
Thank you, Gino. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Kendall.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Thank you.